Welcome, everyone. Thanks so much for taking the time out of a Saturday night. It's been a lot of work going into this by the people you see mentioned up here, notably everyone but me, which is the way it should be. When I first came to the club in the 70s, but seriously in the 80s, was my first encounter with the Mooney as a type and a brand and an airframe. And I've been an admirer of them ever since. And the club has been for all of these years a repository of knowledge about the Mooney. And many of our members have gone on to own Mooneys, and it has been a stepping stone to further airplanes for many, many people. And I'm absolutely convinced that over the years, there has been more knowledge about Mooneys here in the confines of this flying club than you will find almost anywhere else. And I think that carries on today. We have made a commitment to continuing to operate the Mooneys. It's not an idiot-proof airplane by any means. We have been fortunate to fly them successfully and safely, and I believe we have done that by the quality of our training in the airplanes and the knowledge held by people like John Hunter, who probably knows more about Mooneys than all but a very few people in the country, and by front-loading our operations, by being very serious about the training in the airplane. If you look at the accident profile of Mooneys, they have a lot of a certain kind of accident, and we've had very few of those. And we have done it by front-loading our training, and that's what we're doing here tonight. We have made a commitment to upgrade them in a very, very serious way, and the avionics we're putting into them. And Ryan Evans has done a brilliant job of negotiating that. And we have turned to the people in the club who have knowledge, experience, and expertise in untangling this kind of avionics upgrade. You see their names up there. You see them sitting right here. And I think that continues a long tradition that we have had in the club of taking training very seriously. I like to say, if you don't take training seriously, well, ask Boeing. So I need to get out of the way, but I just want to thank the people that we have sitting right here and the people you see mentioned there. Michael Ribnak operates Mooney very much like the ones that we will soon all be flying. Ward Sachs has had similar avionics in an airplane that he has owned and operated. And Ken and Hines, I don't know where they get all their knowledge, but they have led us through operating the new avionics in the Warriors. And I am excited to hear what they have to say about this. Hines, as you know, has built us a simulator that has been a fantastic training device, and he's going to explain how it will help us transition to the Mooneys here. The question, of course, is how are we going to do this? And basically, we're just going to set up a training program. We've already got a lot of that put together. It's going to include a standard profile for training and to serve as a set of standards for operating the Mooneys we have. It's going to be integrating questions about these avionics into the quizzes that we use for all of our airplanes. And it's going to start with this presentation, which they've been working on for a long, long time now. Seems that way. And by getting our instructors spooled up. So it's going to be an education for all of us. I'm excited. If you want more details, they're going to talk a little bit about the training program we're putting together for the Mooneys. And I'm always happy to answer questions. So time for me to get out of the way. Thanks for being here. I'm excited. Love Mooneys too, by the way. Equivalent flat plate drag of a Mooney is 201 is an 11-inch disc, a flat 11-inch disc. Awesome airplane.
All right, good evening, everybody. So we're going to talk about the new avionics and the Mooneys. This is going to be a little bit, perhaps a little backwards. I'm going to do this as if you already know the GFC 500. If you don't worry about it. If enough people are interested in the GFC 500, I've got at the end of this, we can continue on and do that. If it runs too long, we can do that another day. It's essentially the same presentation we did for the Warrior pilots to talk about how you fly with the GFC 500 when we added those to the Warrior. So the first part of this is really going to focus on the G3X Touch, specifically how we do it in the Mooneys, what the other avionics are in the Mooneys. All right. So here's a bit of an outline, some comments, some disclaimers. We'll give you some references, talk about the GFC 500 components, what our Mooney configuration looks like. There have been some other changes other than just the GFC 500 and G3X Touch. Make sure you know what that is, how those interact. It's a much more interactive platform now than we've had before. The G3X Touch, do an intro on that. We've got a Avionics pre-flight profile we set up. These are things that you really should check before you go fly the plane. This system is incredibly flexible and configurable. That's really great, except that means you can configure it some way that somebody else might not like and might not be aware that you've done. We're trying to see if there's a way we can get that where at least when it boots up, it's the same every time. So far, that's not the case. So we want to make sure you go through and check some things so you won't have an issue while you're flying. Then we're actually going to walk through a flight. We took the plane up, Board actually flew the plane. Most of it's on the autopilot, some hand flying in there and walk through a scenario and with the screenshots off the G3X Touch. So you see what it looks like, how it acts while it's in flight. That's where I'm going to kind of break it. Then we can decide if there's enough time this evening, you feel like you can tolerate more. We can do the whole GFC 500 thing that has 3 flight profiles where we use a simulator we have over here that Heinz put together and actually fly the whole flight. I've got 3 different scenarios. We fly in that and you can see how the GFC 500 operates. Now that's with with the GTN 650, the 650 and 750, toss a coin as far as I'm concerned. That really it's not much difference, but you'll see how the GFC 500 works. Talk a little bit more about the GTN 750 in that part. Go over some items checked before flying. The GMC 507, a lot more detail on that. That is the heart. That's the control head for the GFC 500. We typically refer to the GFC 500 as that box up there. It actually has its own name. It's a GMC 507 control. We'll talk about that. And then GFC 500, some of the limitations and some other information about it. Then the flight profiles for that, if you hang around for it, or if we want to do it on the night, that's fine. The first flight with that's going to be using the GPS only as a nav radio. You don't put in a flight plan, zip, you just go out and you're flying, then you want to shoot the ILS back in here. How do I do that? No programming the GPS, nothing, just tune up the ILS and fly it in. The next one that in there is using GPS for course guidance, and then come back and fly the full ILS Yankee 3 back into here, doing a whole little procedure turn, go and miss, and then go out and fly the LPV approach for 2-1 with step downs. So those are the 3 profiles if we do it on the GFC 500 at the end. Some comments, disclaimers. What you see is going to be applicable to other parts of the fleet. We have G5s in the 152s, in the Warriors, and in the 172s. And we had one in the Moonies. Now it's going to go with the G3X Touch. The GFC 500 is in the Moonies, also in the Warriors. It's going to make it much easier for people to move between those two because now you've got the same autopilots. They work virtually identical, not exactly, but very, very similar. Videos that we captured, I mentioned on the new simulator, thanks to the board for funding it, for Heinz putting it together. And just a thing that the simulator does not work exactly like the real plane does, but it's close. So you can really get a good idea of what it does. Some of you already know. Some of you already know some or most of what you're going to see. I hope you do. Here are some references. We've got Dwight put together online for us where we can load up manuals. All the POHs for the planes are up there. The supplements are up there, and the manuals for the planes are all up there. That's where you can get to those. You do have to have a Slack account. It authenticates you through your Slack account. Anybody that's got a Slack account with Wings of Carolina can invite you to join with that. There is a pretty good program from Pilot Workshop on the Garmin GTN. If you're not really good at the GTN, that's the price of it. But again, that's the GTN specific, not the G3X Touch or the GFC 500. Here's some other videos that are really good on talking about the G3X Touch and the GFC 500. The one on the GFC 500, you'll see them using a G5. No big deal. It's just think of the G3X Touch as a great big G5. And then the second one on the G3X Pilot Academy with an autopilot there. So those are three pretty good videos, and I can make these links available to you. Some other references, if you're not good at a GTN, there is a simulator for the GTN 750 for the PC. It covers both the 650, 650XI and the GTN 750. You can also get it for your iPad. Realize there are two separate trainers for the iPad. There's one for the GTN series, and there's one for the GTN XI. Our 750s are not XI, so you want to make sure you get the GTN trainer. All right, so let's talk a little bit about what the GFC 500 components. Now, I'm going to throw that out there. Remember, I said I'm going to talk about the G3X Touch, but you need to understand that in context of the GFC 500, and you'll see where that comes into play. So the first big part of that is the G3X Touch. That's kind of going to be the center of a lot of what we're going to talk about tonight. It has some, they're called LRUs, or line replaceable units, I think is what they're called. It does have an ADAHRS that feeds it. That's taking the pedostatic information and feeding it into the GFC 500. It also has a temperature probe feeding it, so we can get true airspeed, some other information that lets it calculate some more information for us. It also has a magnetometer. I think in the Mooney, the magnetometer is located in the back. Along with that, we put in a backup G5. So you'll see we now also have G5s. We'll have G5s in both. The G5 is a backup for the G3X Touch, and it can only be a PFD if you've flown the Warriors. You know, you can switch it from an HSI to a PFD or back. This as a backup can only be a PFD. You cannot switch it to an HSI. And so the magnetometer feeds both those. If you set the barometric pressure in one, it syncs between the two, so you don't have to set it two different places. We also have the 750, that's remaining. If you've flown the Moonies, you know we have the 750s in there. We did not change that. So here's the GMC 507 autopilot control panel. That's kind of the smart head for the GFC 500. It has buttons and things that are probably similar on most autopilots. We'll talk about those in a little more detail. That talks to the G5, the G3X Touch, and the 750. And there's an interface unit there that helps all the stuff talk a little better together, the GAD29B. Another thing that feeds into the autopilot control panel is a yoke mounted switch. You'll see it in the plane. It's on the pilot side, on the left side of the yoke. I'll throw this out. I do have a limitation later. You're not legally supposed to fly the Mooney from the right seat with the autopilot engaged. You have to have a pilot in the left seat to engage the autopilot. And it's because these controls are over there. Most importantly, the red button where it says autopilot disconnect and trim interrupt. Trim interrupt, keep that in mind. It's an interrupt, so very important for that one. And that's exactly what's in the Warriors. In fact, that picture's from the Warrior, but it looks exactly the same in the Mooney. There's also a takeoff go around button, and you'll see it labeled in the plane. It's right above the throttle on the panel. It's labeled go around, but it's also takeoff. So it's takeoff, go around. We'll talk about that a little bit. There are servos associated with this. These are supposedly really smart servos. I'm not going to get into all that. So it has one servo for the roll. So it's going to take the controls and roll it left and right. It has one for the pitch. That's going to make it pitch up and down. But then it also has one that rolls the trim wheel. So it's got 3 servos. We do not have the yaw servo. So the yaw dampener button on there does nothing for us. Turns out you can get them for the Moonies. We did not get the yaw dampener feature on that. So that's what the system looks like. The GFC 500 cakes and needs essentially all of that. All right, so that's what you're going to interact with in the plane. All the other stuff is behind the scenes. You won't interact with it, but it's important that it's there. And if you want to be really good with this GFC 500 system, you really have to be good with the GTN. It's just no way around it. I mean, you can do some basics, but if you really want to make use of it, you really need to understand that GTN. So that's our system. So here's what our panel actually looks like in the plane. The 2 on the bottom left side over here, I have to remember that people can't see me. These two down here are not actually in the right place on the panel. This one is actually located up off to the left side. And this is the fuel gauge, fancy new fuel gauge. And the transponder is actually located over here to the side of the NavCom. All right, so we got the G3X Touch. Here's the G5. The GMC 507 is at the top of the panel in the center. Then we got the 750. We've upgraded the secondary nav radio to a GNC 255. So that's the COM2 NAV2. The CGR 30P in the center is the same, but one thing has been changed on it. It now talks to the 750. So you actually load the fuel quantity in the CGR, and the 750 will read that fuel quantity. It also reads the fuel flow. So if you've been used to loading in the total fuel in the 750 and then loading up, all right, I want it to say I'm going to burn 9 gallons an hour while I fly. You don't do that anymore. It's going to read it from the CGR. It reads the actual flow, and you tell the CGR how much fuel you loaded in, and then it will keep track of this for you. So it's going to read things from the CGR. So that's one operational difference for 68X right now. This is a new transponder. As a result of these upgrades, you do have to make some ICAO changes. I'll show you those in just a minute. This is a different NavCom. Make sure you understand how to use it. A lot of people, there's two knobs over here. A lot of people just grab a knob and twist it, don't know what it's doing. This top one is the volume control for the COM side. The bottom is the volume control for the nav side. And what you'll find is that people crank this knob down at the bottom, then they realize, oh, it's not my COM volume. Then they'll turn the volume up here. So the next time you get in it and you want to ID the NAV2, you click on NAV2 and somebody's got the volume wide open and it blows your ears out. So just be aware of what you're doing with those two knobs. If you want to switch between COM and NAVs, there's a little button right here. So just make sure you don't just assume this is the standard all radio. It is a little different. Did I miss anything?
Audio panel is a little different.
Oh, the audio panel this is the same audio panel that was in it.
Not 601.
But it's not correct. Okay, this has a remote audio panel. If you haven't flown 68X right, it was upgraded to a remote audio panel. That was not part of this upgrade. So it was already in there before we added the G3X Touch. 60 Romeo is supposed to be exactly like this, including the remote audio panel. So it's going to get this fuel flow. It's going to get this transponder. The CGR 30P is actually going to talk to the 750 just like it does now on this one. For the fuel quantity and flow, it's getting the GNC 255 and it's getting the remote audio panel. So you control the audio panel with the buttons here. There are some configurations where you control the audio panel on the G3X Touch. Ours is not one of them. So we've taken the opportunity to put more data fields up here, and we'll talk about those in a bit. Okay. If you have any questions, speak up or do something on chat, and Heinz will let me know that you've got a question. So let's try to get those as we're going along. As I mentioned, there are some ICAO changes with this.
So there's a question, which is a good one. Does the CGR drive the FL202 gauge?
It does not. There is no interaction between the FL202 gauge and the CGR.
Okay.
No interaction.
But the G3X does get fuel flow information from the CGR, right? Is that correct?
No. The G3X Touch, we do not have the engine interface module for this.
Okay.
So we get no engine data, which would be where you would get fuel flow. We don't have that option on our G3X. Yeah.
So in other words, the fuel rings don't work.
No, they do not. Fuel rings do not work. Correct. Yeah. We didn't get the engine interface module for it, so that's not an option for us. But a good question. Yeah, there is no interaction between the 202 and anything else.
Question about the comms.
Okay.
Yeah, so COM1 and NAV1 are strictly controlled by the GTN, and COM2 and NAV2 are controlled by the GNC 255, talking about changing frequencies.
That's correct.
Okay. And the
Well,
transponder the transponder can be controlled from the touch, the G3? The squawk
Mm.
code?
No,
Okay,
you've got two ways you can do the squawk code, either on the GTX 345 itself.
Yep.
Here.
Yep.
Or you can do it the way we were doing it before. Well, no, we couldn't do it in 6.8 X-ray. You can touch on the GTN here where you see the transponder code.
Mhm.
And that will change this transponder code. So you can enter it here. You can also turn the ident. You click the ident button there. Because the transponder is a little further over, because remember I said the transponder is over here to the side. So you can, this is a little closer to you, you can use this. But it does not show up, and it's not an option to be up here on the G3X Touch. Well, maybe it was an option, we didn't do it, I'm not sure. But it's not on there.
so Ward has Ward is submitting some stuff on chat here. I'm not sure I understand what he's saying.
All right, so the board comment is COM1 and COM2 on the G3X touch.
Yep.
Talk about that.
I was, but not now, but I will, since you brought it
Okay.
up.
Okay.
COM1, COM2, stay tuned.
Yeah. We need to do it now, do it later. It doesn't matter to me. I was going to go into a lot of detail on this panel, and yes, you can interact with COM1 and COM2 a lot of ways from the G3X Touch. We'll see how big a hole we want to dig in with that one.
I'm gonna vote for you just following the structure you've got. This is pretty well thought out.
Yeah, but they don't know what's coming, so I kind of do. So if they ask a question, I'm going to get it later. That's fine. I'll get it later. I'll tell them no.
No.
Okay. So there are some ICAO changes. So the two changes, and we'll update the spreadsheet that's in my FPO. It's not updated yet. So the two changes are in the 10, would be box 10, the equipment code. Our old code for 1068 X-ray was this SBGR/CU2. It's now going to be, instead of CU2, it's now EB2. So in ForeFlight, if you're using that under your ICAO surveillance, select B2 and E and unselect U2. Turns out you can have U2 selected even if you select B2 and E. It does flip off some things, but it leaves the U2, so you got to unselect that. Under other information in ForeFlight, under SUR, change it from 282 Bravo to 260 Bravo. So those are the two changes you'll need to make. There is another code under other, that's the ID code. My understanding is, and I got to verify that does not change, even though we've changed the transponder, that number is coded into the transponder for that airframe. But I'll try to verify that and make sure you know that. Okay. All right.
260B
260 Bravo, correct.
instead of the old.
Yep, instead of 282 Bravo was the old code. Okay. All right, so here's where I was going to go into a lot more detail about the G3X Touch. So this is what the panel looks like. This is what ours looks like. This is actually one where Ward was flying the approach in to runway 21. That's why it's configured this way, looks this way. So we're just going to start from the top. We're going to go across the top. We're going to talk about everything on this page. So just to help out, we'll zoom in a little bit. All right. So somebody mentioned, no, you can interact with the COM1, COM2 with the boxes. You can. So if you touch on this, Garmin's philosophy is if it's in cyan, you can touch on it and change it. So here, if you touch on this, it's in cyan, it will pop up a window that will allow you to enter a new frequency. Then you can hit enter and it will populate it in the standby and it will push that over to the 750. This is talking to the 750. If I touch the white part, you can't change it, but it will flip it in. So I can use this, the G3X Touch to load the frequency in the standby and flip it in. But let me just say one thing now. You do not need to do it that way. You can do it the way you've always been doing it. And I would highly recommend, and Michael pointed this out, you do not need to interact with the G3X Touch much at all. Think of it as a nice big display for your instruments. And do everything, and we'll tell you how to do it with the other things in the plane. You don't need to do all the touching on the screen. changing all the knobs on the screen. You can use a 750, the GMC 507 head, and Navcom 2 to do almost everything you need. And we'll talk about it a little bit more, but there are a lot of fancy features on here. So I'm going to walk you through some of them, but again, you don't have to use them. All right. So that's how you can interact with COM1. COM2 is on the other side. You can do exactly the same thing over here. It's going to push the frequency to standby on COM2. If you touch on this one, it's going to flip the standby in on COM2. In the center up here, this is the data bar. This is what we've configured it for. We're hoping people don't mess with it. We'll talk about that a little bit more. So we've got it. Waypoint is the first data field, distance to your waypoint's the next, estimated time to that waypoint, desired track and track. That's your track. That's what the corresponding track is. Cross track. A lot of people don't like that. I really like it for doing the vectors to final thing. And then the last one here is distance to destination. I will warn you, distance to destination is not the direct to distance to the destination. It's the distance to the destination along your flight track, around what you have in your flight plan. So I could be 1 mile from here going to Liberty and back, and it doesn't tell me my distance to destination is 1 mile. My distance that I'm going to fly is to Liberty and back. So distance to destination is not the direct to distance to the destination. Just make sure you're aware of that. All these fields are GPS driven. So if you don't have a flight planning, you're going to get nothing in here. You'll just get a ground track. Okay. So that's the top bar. So let's talk about the next thing down here. This is the autopilot status bar. You can actually interact with this bar. If you touch on this bar, it will pop up a menu for the GMC 507 control head. So you can actually control the GFC 500 just as if you were reaching over and touching the GMC 507 control head. You can do it on this panel. You don't need to do it on this panel. I would recommend you not do it on this panel, but you can. Okay, so here's, yep.
Just why you recommend that? Because we're all used to doing it on the 750.
Yes.
And it don't change.
Yes.
It's not that there's a flaw in the.
There's no flaw at all. We're just trying to make this where you could go down in a rabbit hole with this thing and there's no reason. You can go fly this thing perfectly safely using the other things that are dedicated buttons. Here things change. So there are some times, and there's one specific time you have to use a status bar, and I'll talk about that. All right, so this is the speed tape. If you're used to speed tapes, it's very much what you're used to. At the top is the true airspeed. Since you have a temperature probe, we can get true airspeed. So here's your airspeeds, indicated airspeeds here. It does have the color-coded bar here. So you can see green. Here you can see the flap extend speed. There are also markers for your V speed references on the side. Your ground speeds located on the bottom here. And if your speed is increasing or decreasing, you'll get a little magenta bar that shows up or down over here. That's giving your airspeed trend. Am I going faster? And I think the look ahead's 6 seconds. So it's giving an indication in 6 seconds. This will be where you are on your speed bar. This one, he's not speeding up or slowing down, so he's doing a really good job holding a steady speed. All right, if we go across here, this is the roll bar. So it's marked off in 10, 20. Let's see, let me get back to my laser pointer. Oh, that doesn't zoom out. All right, sorry about that. So we got a roll bar here. So it's marked off in 10, 20, 30, 45, and 60 degrees. The little triangles you see, oh, you're not seeing, you don't see when I do this. To zoom in. All right, let's see if I can go here. Sorry, guys, I didn't realize you weren't seeing that. So the little green triangles right here is the standard rate roll bank. So if at this airspeed, if you roll into a bank angle here, yeah, I don't know, 17 degrees or so, yeah, that should give you a standard rate turn. This is an option that can be turned on or off. This actually turned on this one. So that's your normal thing for your roll rate. It's also marked off here. You can see for the pitch attitude is here. It's a pretty big pitch attitude. So it's 5 degrees between these. So this is 5, this is 2.5, and then another one 5. So this is a very expanded scale for pitch. Here's your level. this is the yellow here is your aircraft. The magenta bar is your flight director bar. And because it's hot, it's solid here, it means the autopilot is actively controlling, which is what you also see up here in the autopilot status. The little green circle here with the ears off to the side is called the flight path marker. Some people call it the velocity vector, something like that. Garmin calls it the flight path marker. So that's telling you where you're pointed. That's telling where you're actually going right now. So you can see he's pointed at the runway. So that's where we're headed. All right, we move across over here. All right, here's our altitude. We've bugged 2,100 feet, but you can see it's 2,100 is well above us. So here's the bottom edge. So once it's off the top, it just pegs half of the bar here. So you know there's a bug up above. So here's your altitude, your current altitude, and there's your normal tape. This little indicator right here is your baro minimum that's been set. We'll talk about that. Baro minimum you see down here. We'll talk about how you can set that. Again, you don't need to. It's just if you want to set a baro minimum, you can, like for flying in approach. You don't have to. You can fly it the way you're used to flying it. Here's your glide path indicator, and this is magenta. So that means we're getting GPS driven. You can see we're in GPS is controlling the autopilot, and we've got a glide path, not a glide slope. So it's GPS driven, so everything's magenta. Here's our barometric setting, it's 30.04. Over to the side over here, this is our vertical speed indicator. So we're currently going down at 550 feet. You can also see you get a magenta bar over here. We'll talk about split screen mode, and what you lose in split screen mode, because it's going to give you about half the width of this, you do not get this readout of the actual number, but you do get the magenta bar over to the side. So you won't see a number here, 550, but this bar will come down to 550. Okay. We move on down. Here's your normal slip and skid indicator. This is a CDI, a lateral CDI. Let's see, let's scroll on down. So here's our heading indicator. If we dial in a heading, this is in cyan. So if you touch on it, you can type in a heading, or you can have it sync to your heading. You don't need to do that. You can use other knobs to do that function, and I highly recommend you do that. There's a dedicated heading button on the GMC 507 control, or the GMC 507 module. I'm just going to call it GFC 500 just because 507 is hard for me to say. So there's a dedicated heading button on the GFC 500. All you have to do is press it. It will sync the heading. You can scroll the heading. All right, here's your.
In that configuration, Ken, if you mess with the G5 that's in there, that backup G5, could you do it that way as well?
You can. The question was if you use the backup G5, would they sync? Yes, they will.
Question.
Realize the GFC 500, the G5, unless you press it and scroll to some function, it's for setting the barometric pressure. And we're recommending that you use that to set the barometric pressure. Don't set it on the G3X, do it on the G5, it will sync over. The reason I say that, and you'll see in a minute, the bottom right knob on the G3X Touch right now is defaulted to the baro. But you can program it to be anything. Well, not anything. You can program it to be a lot of things. And if you're in split screen mode, that bottom right knob does not do baro. So it's just easier to use the dedicated one on G5. That's what it is. Use it. Same reason for the heading button. It's dedicated for that. Use it on the GFC 500. Same thing for the altitude. Do it on the GFC 500. You can do it on the G3X Touch. You don't need to. Then you don't have to worry about what those knobs are, what their function is right now.
Yeah.
Yes.
Question that's pretty good here is, you mentioned that some, like the data bar fields, you recommend not changing those.
Yes.
The question is, why can they not change those?
I'm not saying you can't change them. You can certainly change it. The question is, do you want somebody messing it up before you get in and fly it? What we're trying to do is have a setup so that everybody can get comfortable with it and fly with it and know what they've got. If everybody sets it's dramatically different, now every time you get in it, you're going to have to spend 10 to 15 minutes going through every setting to make sure it's set the way you expect it to be set. That's what we're trying to avoid. This thing is incredibly customizable. We're trying to avoid that. And we recommend using this. If somebody wants to make a case to it and say, gee, this field, we really ought to have this field, one of those. All right, make the case. We can have that discussion. But you can change it. We're just asking if you change it back.
Yeah.
We're trying to
put-
get it set so that when it reboots, it comes up to this. Right now, that's not the case.
Change the shutdown checklist to say, get this back to the standard configuration if you decide to change it on your own. Make it part of the shutdown. Because somebody will probably, right? Just put it in the checklist. I have a question about your recommendation about not changing these settings using the G3X touch. I'm
Yep.
curious as to your logic, why you recommend not using this as the control interface, so to speak. I think I know why. I mean, my guess is that there's only one airplane or two airplanes in the fleet that have this touch screen ability. So if you just get used to changing things by, let's say, the autopilot control head or the radios themselves, it's more like what's going on in all the other airplanes. But do you have another reason why you recommend not changing things from this touch panel?
Yes, it's because most people already know how to use the other instruments in the
Yeah.
plane. This would
Yeah,
this would not require them to have to learn something new.
yeah, sure.
And the
Yep.
other reason is some of the functions on here can be programmed differently than what you thought they were. Like I said, if you get in here and you reach down and you want to turn the barrow and you reach down and turn the knob and you don't look to see what's it actually doing now,
Mm,
you can change something else.
yeah, sure.
So if we've got a dedicated knob that
Use it.
somebody can't program, or it doesn't depend on what's up on this screen, use it.
Yeah, yeah,
And everybody already knows how to use a 750. Been flying the Mooney, you know how to use a 750.
right.
Pretty much know how to use a normal NavCom radio. Use them rather than going through here. The others
Yep,
also
yep.
keeps your fingerprints off the screen.
Yeah, there you go.
A question.
Another question, okay?
Related to not changing the settings, can there a default setting be created?
Can there be a default setting created? We're trying to get that. I thought they had said it where we could. I tried it and it didn't stick. So I don't know if they didn't do it. Ryan didn't think they said it for that. I thought they had. So that's something we're working on. Our goal and our hope is that, if I can get this back here, that this, when you bring the plane up, when you start it up, that it comes up in this configuration that looks just like this, the same data fields, everything's set like this. That was our goal. We've not gotten there yet. Okay. All right. So where were we? All right. So we've got the slip indicator here, skid slip. You got a lateral CDI. We talked about the heading. You also have your course selector here. Now you can't set this because it's GPS, but if you're in VOR mode, you can set the course. You can touch on this, or your knob at the bottom right might be able to change the course, might not.
Same with your OBS mode.
Same with your OBS mode with the GPS, right? So I keep talking about the knob. You see down here, this is the bottom, the knob down here. This says right now it's set for barrow, that you can change the barrow. This will change very, very frequently as to what this knob is going to do. So before you twist a knob, even if you thought it was going to be that, read what it says that knob is going to do. We'll talk about the knobs a little bit more.
Enter and out of knob.
It is an inner and outer, and you can push it. And I'll talk about that. Okay, so we've done that. Here's the barrow minimums. If I wanted to change the barrow minimum, I'd touch this. You can type in whatever you want for the barrow minimums. I'll show you how you get that on the screen. By default, it does not come up there. We've got two insets. Here's the one on the left. We've set it for a map inset. And the way this works with this inset, if I reach over on the screen and I touch that inset now becomes the right half of the screen. So it goes into split screen mode and the map pops up. Very similarly over here on the right-hand side of the screen is the flight plan. If I touch on this map inset, if I touch on this inset, the flight plan pops up on the right-hand side of the screen. Do you need to do anything with that flight plan on that screen? Absolutely not. Use the GFC 5, use the GTN 750. This flight plan is being pushed to the G3X touch from the GTN. That's where, and you can't even modify this flight plan on the G3X Touch. You can only kind of see it and do some interesting things with it, but you can't change it. That said, there is an internal mode for the G3X Touch. You can have an internal flight plan. We highly recommend you not do that. It's not approved for IFR. It's for VFR only. So if your 750 dies, yes, you can use this, load a flight plan into the G3X Touch directly. It's not how we recommend you fly it. One, you don't know how to fly it that way. You're used to the 750 flight with the external GPS.
Question,
Yeah.
how do you minimize the pop-ups once they're out?
Okay. How do you get out of split screen? Got a couple of ways to do that. Everybody's going to ask all the questions before I get to them. All right. Let's see.
And feel free to.
Yeah. I know. All right. One way to get back is this little button on the corner, split screen. That's how you can split it. That's how you can take it out of split mode. The other option, if you're in split mode, is to press and hold the back button. If you press and hold the back button, it will take it back to full screen, to PFD full screen. All right. So we talked about the insets. You have a little cute little feature here. That's the wind vector.
Can I get one more question?
Sure.
So the cyan on the flight plan indicates that it can be changed, question mark?
Cyan. You can interact with it, but you can't change it. You could bring up information about it. So if there's a waypoint in your flight plan, you can bring up the flight plan, touch on that and get waypoint information. That's all you can get from it. You cannot change the flight plan because the flight plan is from the GTN 750. If you want to change a flight plan, do it on the 750 way you've always done it. It will not let you change it here. Okay. So there's your wind vector. So it's 6 knots, gives you direction. There's a little cute little area that shows you oriented the way you're going, where it is. All right, here's your HSI. Ford's doing a great job of flying. Actually, I think the autopilot's flying it, staying right on the course line. You can see it's in GPS 1, so it's being controlled by GPS 1. So it's indicating from GPS 1. It's actually in LPV mode. At the top of the HSI, you see the little bars going around the side up there. That's actually the rate of turn indicator. You'll see one later. You'll see there's a magenta bar that comes out either way. There's 2 bars. The first one is half standard rate. The second one is full standard rate. And if you go past full standard rate, it just puts a little arrow on the end of the magenta bar that comes out. And you'll see that in some of the other slides. I'll try to point it out when we get there. Okay. What else is cute on here? All right. Some other things on here that we're trying to get people, that we want people to kind of not modify. If you do, but try to set it back. You can program 2 bearing pointers on the HSI. And I'll show you where they are. So one bearing pointer is going to show up as a single line with an arrow. You can't really see it because it's right behind the magenta bar here. So it's set right now for nearest airport. So it's going to always show you the nearest airport is whatever way it's pointed. That's what it's going to do. It's going to point to the nearest airport. The other one is set to VOR2. So whatever's in NAV2, that's the bearing pointer to whatever's loaded in NAV2. So that's the double bar with a arrow on it. So you can see it's pointing over to 3. I don't even know what's loaded in here because I have no idea what I stands for on that one. Pardon me? Oh, I keep doing it here thinking that you can see that. All right. So here is one bearing pointer. You see it's a single line with an arrowhead. You can barely make out. There's the arrowhead right in here buried behind the magenta line. There was the GPS one I mentioned, the LPV. The bearing pointer 2 is the VOR2 showing right here. And so you can see it's pointing right here. This is the bearing pointer 2. Those can be turned on or off, and you can have them set for other things. This seemed like a reasonable setting for us, but you can certainly program them, change them. I'll show you where those changes can be done. Another feature that's kind of handy on here, and it's like a lot of things on this machine, you can get to it multiple ways, is there's a timer down here. Now, this timer doesn't look like you can interact with it, but if you touch on that timer, it gives a little pop-up timer window, and you can click start, and it will give you a little timer right there. If you click on this timer, it's going to pop a timer up right down here in the bottom of the screen, and it has a start, stop, reset on it. So you can use that for a timer on the screen. There are other ways to get to that timer, but this is the quickest way because this timer is always shown down here.
Is that tied into the ILS or other approaches that
would use, but no clients would use it.
That timer function is always there. It's not tied to anything. It's just a timer available to you on the G3X Touch, just like you had a stopwatch. It's just a timer there for you to use.
It's a 750 timer that pops up when you start. Some of your coaches.
No, this one just, it's just a timer available for you to use. It's a user timer. Okay. Anybody else have any question?
The
Yep.
the CDI that's here in the HSI, is that always nav1?
Absolutely not.
Okay.
And you'll see later that we actually do part of the flight off of VOR2. Now, one thing you might not have realized in the panel, there is no nav2 CDI head anymore. This is it. This is it. There is no secondary head to run off nav2, so it's here or nothing. Okay, anybody else any question on that one before we move on?
Yeah.
Yes.
The backup G5, is it only interact with nav1?
The backup, the question is, does the G5 only interact with nav1? I'm not 100% sure. I think it only operates with the GPS because there's no VOR or ILS. The CDI on the G5 is only driven off the GPS.
Well, if you got 750 set up with nav, that's a VOR.
I don't think it can. I'm not convinced it drives the G5s. In the normal configuration, it does not. The lateral CDI on the G5 is only GPS driven. I'm not sure in this configuration. I haven't actually tried that. Do you know, Hans?
So I think when we were testing it, we were able to switch the G5 presentation. You know, it's a primary flight display, but you still get there. When we were testing it, we were able to set the G5 presentation from GPS to VLOC off the GTN. We were not able to set it to VLOC 2 on the second radio. So just off the GTN, but it could do GPS and VLOC.
Okay. I stand correct.
Ken, before you move on, you want to talk a little bit about the club standard for the HSI setup and the danger if someone changes it, what that could do when you're navigating, particularly on an approach?
You're talking about heading versus track?
Yes.
Yeah, that's later. It's in here. It's part of the pre-flight check. What Ward's bringing up is there is an option in here. Everything is configurable on this thing. You can change this. So instead of it showing track, instead of it showing heading, it shows track. And it can create some issues. So that's what he's talking about. So that's one of the things we want you to check when you're doing is that somebody has not switched to track. I'm not sure why you would switch it to track. Okay, so let's move on. All right, so we talked a little bit about the bezel functions here. These are concentric knobs. They are programmable. So this one right now, if you look at it, the inner knob is how you dial in your heading. The outer knob is how you dial in altitude. If you press it, it's also a press. It would sync the heading. Again, these are programmable. Somebody could change them. So our recommendation is to use the GFC 500 heading and altitude bugs instead. They're dedicated. Also there, you may or may not be aware, on the GFC 500, you can sync the altitude by pressing the altitude button. It will sync your current altitude. The nearest and direct button that are shown here only work with an internal flight plan. So we're telling you to use the external GPS. These buttons will do nothing for you. They will do nothing for you. Recommendation, don't use these unless the GTN 750 has failed. Just use the 750. You already know how to use it. The right bezel functions, the right knobs. So the menu, we'll talk about that a little bit, but the concentric knobs are programmable. So you see here, it's bezel in this case. Down here, look, now it's zoom and page select. That's why I say, make sure you look at it. So if you happen to have, in this case, we have the map page up So it's in split screen with the map. And ATC calls you up and gives you a barometric pressure change. You reach down, start cranking the knob. Guess what? You're changing something else. You're not changing the barometric pressure. Okay. So they're programmable, depends on what you're seeing on the display. Always look at the screen to see what it's going to do before you twist. Again, we recommend using the knob on the G5. It's a dedicated knob. Just reach up there and twist the barometric pressure on the G5. The menu button, a single press. Guess what? What it does depends on what's displayed on the screen, just like everything else. So if you're in split screen, the menu button here is going to bring up the menu for the right half of the G3X touch screen. If you double press it, it brings up the main menu for the G3X. If you're in full screen PFD, you press that menu button, it brings up the menu for the PFD. The back button will back you out of the menu. Press and hold takes you back to full screen. I have a vague remembrance that if you press and hold it, if you're in full screen, it might go back to split. That I'm not sure of. That's why I got question marks there. Maybe Michael's in the crowd and he can let us know. Okay, so that's kind of an overview of the G3X Touch itself. We're going to go in a little more detail with some stuff and then we'll start doing a flight. Everybody still with us? Anybody got any more questions on that? All right, so a little bit on the GFC 500. I'm doing this. If you're familiar with the GFC 500, you're used to what the G5 autopilot status bar looks like. That's what it looks like on the top of the G5. It looks a little different on the autopilot. The status bar, here's the status bar for what it looks like. The primary difference for you, other than the colors being slightly different, is they organize it differently for some reason. On the G5, the left-hand side before the white bar, the left side corresponds to the left side on the control head. The center part corresponds to the center part. The right part corresponds to the right part. So this is lateral, this is the autopilot status, and this is the vertical status. For the G3X, they decided to switch it. Here's your autopilot status on the left side. So that's what the center part is. The next part is the lateral mode that it's in. That's what this part's doing. And over to the right is the vertical part. Don't ask me why. All right, so just as a quiz, what is this one doing for us? Autopilot's engaged. So we've got autopilot engaged, autopilot engaged. It's controlling pitch and roll. The active modes, the lateral mode is in GPS. Oh, it's actually the active mode is in heading. And the active mode, yep, and it's in altitude hold at 5,000 feet. Those are the active modes. The armed modes are in white in both. So it's armed for GPS for an RNAV approach, and vertical, it's set for a glide path. Okay, quick and dirty on the GFC 500. All right, so somebody's mentioned some things, so let's go through the pre-flight you need to do before you fly this. Sure, sure.
You mentioned how you use that vertical speed indicator. So if you're running on a VS there, how do you, and you don't have that, where are you going to read out your vertical speed?
You can, okay. The VS on the G3X Touch is what you're actually doing. If you know what you're commanding it to do based on the GFC 500, it will show up in the status bar. You'll see the vertical speed that you've dialed in that you're trying to make it fly on the status bar. It will show up here. Yeah, it shows up. And if we get to the GFC 500 part, you'll see how that works. Yeah, it shows up. All right, so pre-flight for the GFC 500. If you read the manual, it actually says to overpower it. The word from Garmin is don't. There's been some, and we understand they are going to change it. They're going to tell you not to overpower it. I know every Mooney driver in here is used to taking it and overpowering the controls, both roll and pitch. Don't. They say it can damage the unit. The thing I was told is that you actually take a motor and you've turned it into a generator and you're back feeding power back into the GMC 507 head, which causes problems. It's also some concern that it actually starts to work the bridle loose. So don't overpower it. In fact, if you ask those times, you say, if it boots up and boots up successfully and you don't get an error, that is the test. My preference is no, I want to know that it actually is going to work a little right. So we're going to walk through a pre-flight test for it. What we're kind of recommending. All right, so when you get in the plane, press the autopilot button on the GMC 507 head. So if I say GFC 500, GMC 507 head, same thing. So you press the button. What you should see on the G3X Touch, these are all G3X Touch displays. You should see autopilot, should go and roll and pitch. That's the default mode when I just engage the autopilot. All right, put the heading bug under the lubber line, center the heading bug up. Press the heading bug. Now you see it should show that it's engaged in heading mode. And you want to take that heading bug, roll it left and right. See that the aircraft, the yoke goes left and right. Make sure it follows it. So now you know that roll servo is working and the bridle's not broken loose. It's actually controlling it. Press the autopilot button, pause, and then press it again. So that's going to disengage and then re-engage the autopilot. You might have to turn on the flight director. I'm not 100% sure of that before you do this, because what you want to get back in is back into roll mode. And then we're going to hit the VS mode. And now you can see, here's the VS indication you talked about. And we're going to use the thumb wheel. If you don't remember what, there's a little rolling wheel, not a knob, but a wheel that you can roll. And that's what you're doing with the nose of the aircraft. Not if you're up or down, it's what do I want to make the nose do? Just like you do in the plane, and make sure it will actually make the controls go forward and backwards as to go to initiate a climb or a descent. All right. Once you've done that, we're going to press the autopilot disconnect switch on the left yoke handle. You say, well, why am I doing that? Okay, we're going to test all ways to disconnect that. So right here, we're going to use the autopilot button on the autopilot head to make sure that will disconnect it. Here, we're making sure the autopilot disconnect, the red button on the yoke will disconnect it. So then we're going to re-engage the autopilot by hitting the autopilot button on the GFC 500. Then we're going to press the trim switches, press both trim switches either forward or backwards, and make sure that disengages the autopilot. So those are the three ways we can disconnect that sucker. Press the go around button. We're on the ground sitting there. Why are we going to press the go around button? Well, it's also a takeoff button. So what you should see, the flight director should move to a VY climb pitch attitude, and you should see TO for the lateral and the vertical. So that's what you should get as an indication. And that's what it should look like underneath. For the flight director, you see the flight director is pitched up to about 7 degrees. And here, these magenta bars are hollow. That's telling you that the autopilot is not engaged, but that the flight director is engaged. All right, select takeoff for VS mode, press the or the flight director button to turn off the flight director. Then you want to make sure your flight controls are free, that the servos are disengaged. Both roll and pitch. Next, identify where the autopilot and pitch trim circuit breakers are. You want to make sure you know where those are, because if you happen to get a pitch runaway, you want to make sure you know how you can disconnect that. Remember I said that red button on the left yoke says autopilot disconnect, trim, interrupt. Hold that button until you find those breakers and pull them. Then you can let go of that button. If you use that and it disengages the autopilot and you let go, the pitch trim still may run away. But if you hold it, it's interrupted the power to the pitch trim servo. And the intent of that is so you can go find those breakers and pull them. Once you're done with all that, set your trim for takeoff because you've already screwed it up and down. So make sure you get that trim set back. All right, so that's the GFC 500. All right, so let's talk about the GTN 750. Some of you probably want to do this, so some of this may be a little boring for you. All right, make sure the nav databases are current. There's also a nav database in the G3X Touch, but we'll talk about that in a little bit. So make sure the databases are current. Nav database is required if you're IFR. Training and obstacle databases, hopefully they're current. We would recommend that. Electronic flight bag, you're going to connect via Bluetooth to what's called, and this one's going to be November 1068 X-ray 510. We're hoping there's going to be a 510 in 60 Romeo. It's a board decision. If not, if that's not the case, you'll have to make 2 connections to the plane. Right now, all you need to do is connect to the 510 to get flight plan up and down, and also get traffic and weather on your tablet.
And this is no different than the way 6/8 X-ray was before.
Correct. This is no different. This is no different than what it was before. The difference is if they take the flight, which is a little card, if they take that flight stream 510 card out, or if they don't put one in 60 Romeo, now to be able to upload, download flight plans and get weather and traffic, you have to make two Bluetooth connections, one to the G3X Touch and one to the connects on the GTN 750. So I'm hoping they'll both be the same, but not my decision. All right, map orientation, make sure you verify that again, because everything's programmable on the 750. Check, make sure if it's track up or north up. So here's how you do that. That's the menu sequences you go through for that. Auto zoom on or off depends on your preferences. I like it off. Some people like it on. Some people like north up. Some like track up. Make sure those are set the way you want them before you take off in the clouds. Visual approach selector, we recommend turning it off because all it does is take up a data field on the map page. If you want to turn it on, okay. Just make sure you know if it's on or off and what its impact going to be for you. GPS status, because we got nasty flight instructors who will turn off WAS to make sure you know how to fly partial panel and sometimes forget to turn it back on. Always verify it before you fly IFR, particularly in IMC, that the WAS is enabled. Here's how you do that. And if you want, I can pop up the 750 to show you. It's under System, GPS Status, SBAS, and you look to see that WAS is enabled. If you've never seen that, I highly recommend you look to see that. Map screen fields, you can set those the way you want them. That's nothing different. Nothing different on here than what we've had. This is just kind of a refresher on what you really need to check on the plane. ILS, GPS localizer switch should be on auto switch. That's not one I've been checking, although I have heard that it's been turned off before. So it's now part of my pre-flight is to make sure that is set to auto switch. What that is, if you're flying in nav mode with the GPS to ICTAL and you turn inbound, once you pass ICTAL inbound, it automatically switches to the ILS. The auto switches for you, so you don't have to reach up and switch from hit the CDI on the map page. It will automatically switch for you. That's what that does. All right. Any question on the 750? Okay. G3X Touch. Here's what we're going to say. Settings to change as you desire. Split screen, full screen. It's really easy to switch back and forth, so we don't worry about that one too much. We kind of recommend flying full screen PFD most of the time, particularly the last part of an approach. So we talked about that. Somebody mentioned here's how you change that. There's a little split screen in the top corner up there. This is the top right of the G3X Touch. That's where it is to go back to full screen. Or again, you can use hold the back button down. Map orientation, again, do I want track up or north up? Auto zoom, on or off, again, kind of like the 750. ESP mode. All right. If you fly Warrior, you know about turning off ESP mode. You do it on the G5. You cannot turn ESP mode off from the G5 in the Mooney. It's not one of the functions there. You have to do it from the G3X Touch, and this is one time you have to touch that bar. There's no other way to do it. So here's how you get to it. So if you go to the G3X Touch and you touch the autopilot status bar, there's nothing showing, but it's still the autopilot status bar. If you touch on that bar, this is the window that pops up. So here you can see all the autopilot functions are right here. And there's the ESP button. So that's where you turn it off. If you want to do training in the Mooney and you're going to do steep turns, that's where power on, power off stalls, that's where you need to turn the ESP off. ESP by default is turned on every time the system boots up. So you have to turn it off if you want to do a training flight. Normal flying, you'd never want to turn it off, but if you can do training flights, that's where you go. And this is the only way to get to it. Okay. All right, some more on the pre-flight. So here are some settings we're saying should not be changed. We highly recommend that you don't change them. Navigator input, we recommend you leave it on external. That just means it's going to be driven by the 750. And there's some screens as we do the flight. I'll show you where those buttons are. HSI orientation, that's what Ward brought up. Heading, make sure the HSI orientation is set for heading, not for track. Synthetic vision enabled. You You might not like it. It's easy, pretty easy to turn off, but it's actually at the bottom of the menu that when you bring the menu up, you actually have to scroll down to find it. It doesn't pop up there. So you have to get to the menu and then scroll down to find it. Pathways, we recommend them off. Pathways are the highway in the sky representation that Garmin gives you on the G1000. If you've seen them, where it puts the little boxes that you fly through the boxes. To me, they clutter it up. We kind of think it clutters it up. So we recommend you just turn them off. If you really, really want them, nobody can stop you. Flight path marker, we recommend that's on. That's a little circle that's telling you where you're headed right now. The data bars at the top, this is what we currently have, and that's what we're recommending people leave. To modify that, you have to hit the menu twice to get to the main menu, and then go scroll down on that list all the way down to the bottom. There's a data bar and then data fields. That's where it's changed. So these are how you get to those things on the screens. I don't want to spend the time to walk through every one of those, but that's where they are. We are recording this, so you can get to this later, and I'm happy to give you the slide deck if you want it. Inset windows. We kind of like the configuration with the map on the lower left. It actually shows traffic on that. You'll actually see traffic in the synthetic vision screen up on the big screen on PFD, and you actually see that when we actually go flight. You'll see traffic pop by. Flight plan on the bottom right. Bearing pointers, as I talked, nearest airport and VLOC 2. I think that's a pretty good choice for those. So that's our recommendation for things that you don't modify. So what I'm going to do is I'm going to show you sort of the startup screens as you're starting to boot this thing up. Unfortunately, we could not get a screenshot of the first screen where you get the databases because it's not booted up enough to let us do a screen capture. But there is a screen that'll give you a list of databases on the right-hand side of the screen. So it gives you a list of databases and you have to touch continue to continue. So this is the next screen that you'll get. Anybody see anything unusual about that screen? So AHAR's alignment is just completed. Pitch stream, because here's what's happening. Everything is booting up right now. Not everything is up and ready. So that's what's going on. That's why we got this big red X over here. That means that COM1 is not working. Doesn't mean it's failed. It's just not booted up yet. So you'll see that. Don't panic. It's waiting for you on the GTN. You've got to hit the continue buttons over there. Until you get through all that, that's going to show a big red X on COM1. So you got to hit those continue buttons on that. Okay. So you'll get this as a startup screen, sort of working through as everything's powering up. We talked about this. Go over to hit the status bar here, turn off ESP mode. If you don't know what that is, it's a GFC 500 thing. We can talk about that later. It's just quickly, it's electronic stability and protection, to keep you from rolling too far left or right or pitching up or down too much. It's like a lane assist in a car. If you got a modern car, you get over to the line, it starts to nudge you back. That's what this does. It nudges you back to a safe. And if you fight it too long, it says, had enough of you, I'm going wings level. And it will take over. That's
question.
Yeah,
It's a bit of a loaded question. Mooney with this G3X touch in it, if you're in cruise flight, what does the attitude indicator look like? Does it look like this picture here that we're looking at?
No, we're sitting on the ground right now.
Does it in flight? Does it show?
You'll see when you'll see one in a minute.
Okay.
We actually have a flight. We're in level flight. You'll see what it looks like.
Okay. Cool.
Yeah, we're actually sitting on the ground. You know how the Mooney, you're kind of sitting back a little bit, and that's what you're seeing. We're sitting on the ground.
Okay.
All right. So I mentioned several things that you want to check in the pre-flight. So if you just touch on the HSI, this is the menu that pops up. This is the PFD options. So I mentioned flight plan on GPS. There's another way you can see this. If you click on the flight plan, you actually be able to change it there as well. But here it says a flight plan source, external GPS. CDI source says GPS 1. That means it's hooking to the 750. If I wanted to, let's say instead of the GPS 1, let's say I wanted the localizer 1 that's in the nav on the 750. You do not select that here. You select that on the 750, hitting the CDI select on the 750. What this button does is let you select the 750 or nav 2. So that's what you're selecting now. It says GPS 1 here. If I switch to CDI, this would say localizer 1 or VOR 1. So my choices in would be, so the choices for the 750, it's going to show only one of the following. It's either going to say GPS 1, localizer 1, or VOR 1. That's not a choice you get to make here. It's only going to show one. It depends on what mode the 750 in and what frequency I have there. The other choice is VOR2 or localizer 2. It's only going to show one of those. Depends on what frequency you've got loaded in the VOR2. Those are your two choices. You're selecting the box that the CDI signal is coming from. You're either selecting the 750 or NAV2. All right, here your insets on the PFD. Here's the lower left is set for map. Lower right is set for flight plan. Here are your bearing pointers, nearest airport. VLOC 2. So that's where those things were all set. So they're all set right here. Here's another way you can get to that timer I mentioned. This timer is the same as the one if I touch on the timer down at the bottom. There's no reason to bring this one up, clutter your screen. You can just touch on that same thing. I mentioned baro minimums. You see baro minimums are not showing. So let me back up. Here's the screen. One more. You don't see baro minimums showing in here. If I want baro minimums, all I do is touch on the HSI and I click on this set minimums right here. That's what baro minimums, that's how you set it. If I touch this more options button here, you can actually scroll to it, see it's highlighted, and I press the knob. You can also get to it as well. This is the menu. This is the PFD setup menu. So here we can actually change this presentation from tapes to round gauges. We don't recommend you do that. And there's actually a whole host of more things down. You see the little indication there says scroll list. That means the knob on the bottom right will scroll down this list. You can also just scroll the list with your hand on the touch screen. Whole bunch more stuff down at the bottom. The data bar's at the bottom. The flight path is at the bottom. And the synthetic vision. Those are all options off the bottom of the screen. You have to scroll up to get to them. All right. One thing you will need is how do I set the brightness of this sucker? Right now, so if you hit the menu button twice, this is the screen you'll get on the split screen. You'll get a screen over here. This is the main menu for the G3X Touch. Right here, you'll see highlighted in cyan, says backlight. If I touch on that, or if I highlight this by using the knobs, and then I press the knobs, you will get this pop up. This is how you adjust the brightness. It is currently set for manual, unless somebody's changed it to something else. And if you notice, once that pops up, look what happens down here. It says small step, large step. So I can adjust it. I can reach up and use the plus minus buttons on here, or I can use the knobs based on what it's telling me down there. If I don't want manual, I can click on the drop down here, and these are your options: manual, light bus, photo cell. We do not have it connected to the light bus. If you put it on that, you got no control at all. So either select photo cell. What we don't know is at night, if you put it on photo cell, is it too dark? If you put it on photo cell and it's too dark, go back to this, switch it to manual and set it yourself. But that's where you get to set the brightness for those you like fly at night, or in the daytime if you need to turn it up, somebody else has turned it down. So that's where you get to that. So I thought that was important that you see where that is. All right, there are a couple other ones. I just thought I'd throw them up here. Emergency, if you highlight that one and click on it, this is what you get. You can tune to 121.5. Not sure how it's going to populate this down here yet. I've not tried it in flight. There may be some other configuration issue. This one, you see what it does if you clicked on that one. All right, so what else? All right, I think that's all I wanted there. Okay. How do I know which source I've selected and what it's doing? So I just want to go a couple of slides here. Down here, if you look at this, this says Loc 1. That means I have selected the 750 as my CDI source. I have a localizer frequency dialed in. And I've selected the localizer from the CDI select on that screen. So it says localizer. So not only does it tell me I've selected the VLOC side, it's telling me I have a localizer frequency loaded in. If I switch it to a VOR frequency, it says VOR1. If I switch from that panel where I showed you, you have a choice of selecting the 750 or NAV2. This is now off NAV2, and I have a localizer frequency loaded in NAV2. So it's showing that, and you see it's now a double green bar or double green line. That's telling me it's off the secondary box, and it's got a localizer frequency loaded in. If I dial in a VOR frequency, it says VOR2, again with the double green bars. Just wanted you to see that. That's what those representations mean. All right, so we're going to do a flight. Go through a quick setup on the G3X Touch, and this is how Ward's flying it. We're going to taxi from the south ramp out to runway 2. When you say, "Why am I going to taxi?" I'm going to show you safe taxi. We're going to fly towards Liberty. We're going to intercept and track a course, the 291 course or the 110 radial to Liberty using nav2. We're going to do this with the autopilot. So you see, I'll just select nav2 and fly the autopilot with nav2. Then we're going to do some steep turns, unusual attitude recovery with the level button. Then we're going to fly to ICTAL. I'm going to use the VNAV function. I'm not going to talk much about VNAV. It's a complicated beast in itself. At the ICTAL, we're going to do hold and loop procedure turn. When we did this, this is where we had the case. We left it in GPS mode. And when it switched from the GPS source to the localizer, it went into roll mode. We had to re-engage the approach mode, or we had to engage the approach mode. We got to find out if that's supposed to do that or not. Don't think it's supposed to. It doesn't in the Warriors, but we'll have to confirm that. We do miss with the go around button. You'll see how that works. And then we actually went around and shot that approach again, partial panel, by pulling the breaker. For you instructors, if you want to do partial panel, your only option, pull the breaker for the PFD. The autopilot will disconnect. If you hit the autopilot disconnect button, it will clear that error, and you'll see it on the G5. You can re-engage the autopilot and fly it from the G5. The G5 will fully control the autopilot. So you really don't lose any functionality. It will switch over to that, or you can switch it back on when that's up and running. Arts, and then we went out and we flew the RNAV 21, and we used VNAV again on that one. All right, so we're sitting on the ramp. This comes up, so we verify everything on here, set the way we want it. You've already seen the screen, so we just go through that and make sure everything's set the way we want it. We've now loaded our flight plan in, KTTA to Liberty to KTTA. And again, we did not load that on the G3X Touch. We did it on the 750. It pushes it over here so we see it. We're still sitting on the south ramp. All our data fields are up here now populated, so it's 28 miles of Liberty. You see, I'm sitting on TTA. The distance is not 0. It's 58.2 because it's distance there and back. And we're not in the center of the airport. That's why it's 58.2. Also, why this is set off to the side. Okay, so we've got that all loaded in. We got our flight plan loaded in. You see, we do not have bare minimum set in yet. So we're going to go fly this. So here we're starting to taxi out. And how do I get this safe taxi? I select the map. And you can see there are other options here. Once I bring up the map, I clicked on the bottom left screen on the PFD. All I did to get to that, oops. I got to go back one more. All I did was click on this. That brought the map up. And then I zoomed in. All you do is zoom in. That's how you get safe taxi. Just zoom in. You zoom in, safe taxi is going to start to appear when you get zoomed in enough that it's going to be useful for you. And we're taxiing down the taxiway here. I have no idea what he's doing with the autopilot at this point. I think this is where we did the autopilot test and we hadn't cleared the test yet. So we're taxiing down. You say, well, gee, it looks like we're taxiing across the field. The synthetic vision does not have the taxiways in it. The safe taxi does. So don't worry about what you see here. Here's where we are. We're taxiing down. If I'm missing something, Hans, speak up.
Does
Yeah.
pinch to zoom work, or do you have to hit the plus minus button to zoom work?
Pinch to zoom. The question is, does pinch to zoom work? Yes, it does. You can pinch to zoom. You can use the little plus minus up here, or as you see down here, it says zoom map. If I use the inside knob on the bottom, I can use that to zoom in or out. That's why I say be careful what you're turning, because you see the functions down here change. The big knob changes the page, so I can change the chart, waypoint, flight plan, weather, whole host of stuff. Okay, so we're taxiing out. We started to make our turn on. You can actually see the runway markers here for runway 21. And I'd mentioned traffic shows up. Here's somebody on the downwind flying by. That's what that is. That's somebody flying by on the downwind. Okay, so you can see what he's done. He's engaged takeoff mode. So we hit the takeoff go around button. So we're takeoff mode. Autopilot is not connected. Just put our flight director up. So there's our flight director showing. We're set it to fly the leg from KTTA to Liberty. All right, so now we're turning on to the runway, and you see the bar, how it's come out to the side here with the arrow on the end. That means we're turning. We're actually in a turn. We're on the ground, but we're turning. That's our rate of turn indicator. Ball's getting to the outside, which it should. There's our downwind traffic taxiing by, so we still have time to get out. Okay. All right, now we've taken off. We're still in takeoff mode, so we're still hand flying this. You can see that we're flying over this way, so we got a little bit of bumps going on. We're on climb out right now. So all of our indications up here are now active. There's our desired track to go to Liberty. There's our current track. Our cross track from our flight plan, which is way back here from our course. Okay. So we're still climbing out. Let's see, now we've turned towards Liberty. So we're on our right heading. We've also engaged the autopilot. So the autopilot's engaged. We're engaged in heading mode, and we're engaged with an indicated airspeed climb of 90 knots. So we've hit heading, we've hit indicated airspeed, and used the thumb wheel. Now, when you hit indicated airspeed, it captures your current airspeed. If you want something else, you use the thumb wheel to dial up or down. Do I want the nose to go down so I go faster? I want the nose to go up. I want to go slower. So use the thumb wheel to dial that up and down. And you get an indication here that tells you what that is. Okay. So we're now climbing out. You can see over here, I talked about the look ahead for the airspeed. That's what this little bar is over here, the little magenta bar there. You see here's the magenta bar coming up. Right now we're doing about 400 feet a minute at this point. All right, so we're in heading mode, so we're not going to track back over to this, to our course line. So we made a turn. We decided, all right, let's intercept the radial off the Liberty VOR using nav2. So we went to the PFD page, we selected nav2. We dial in the course of 291, so we're on the 11, supposed to be 290, but anyway, so the 111 radial inbound. You see the course line is off to right the way we're flying. So we did an intercept heading. So we're in a heading and we've armed the nav mode. And we're actually also now climbed to 4,500 feet. So we're active mode is heading. Autopilot is engaged. It's holding level at 4,500. The nav mode is armed and it's going to capture the VOR. Okay, so it's now captured. So this has now become green. So the nav is now the active mode, and we're tracking that towards Liberty. Okay, now he's doing a descent. So we've dialed in a lower altitude. So we've dialed in 3,500 feet. We were at 45. So he's dialed in an altitude of 3,500. He's now hit VS on the GFC 500. And then use the thumb wheel to thumb down to 500 feet per minute. And you see it's got a little down arrow here. It says you've dialed it to go down at 500 feet a minute. So we started a descent. So it's going to descend and it's going to level off at 3,500 because our altitude select has been dialed to 3,500. So it's going to start a descent down to that. And you see we're descending at about 4,500. So it hadn't quite gotten to the 500 yet. And one cool thing about this, you see your Solder City over here. Just give us a little indication that it's over there. I didn't mention it, but if you see, let me zoom in here for this. This little bar that you see there, that's when you should reach the altitude that you've dialed into your altitude select. That's telling you when you should reach that altitude. And that's there for a climb or a descent. It's going to give you an arc that says this is roughly where you should reach that altitude that you've dialed in.
Oh, is that the glide ring that's showing up around your plane there?
That is a glide ring.
Yeah.
Yep.
Does that bar disappear then when you reach your altitude?
Yes.
Level out.
Yeah, you level out. Yeah. All right. So one question was, let me just bring this up. There was a question about this ring, the little blue jagged ring. That is the glide ring. Okay. All right. So, all right. Anybody guess what we're doing? Steep turn to the left. Ward did an incredibly job here. You notice you see those little green fences? Looks like a fence over there. We mentioned ESP mode. That's where ESP will then start to try to engage if you get to that. If you touch that with your bank angle, those bars will turn yellow and move in to 30 degrees. It's telling you, get back, you're too far over. He held it about 43, 44 degrees for the whole turn, so we never engaged it. All right, so that's what it looks like on the screen here. This is what the map looks like on the other side. We've now gone to split screen with the map. Just to give you an idea what it looks like. Here's some traffic showing up over here, and that's their vector that they're flying. What else we want to show on here? I think that's all I really wanted to talk about on that one. Some more of the turn. Now we're doing a turn back the other way. Steep bank to the right. Let's see, somebody mentioned, what does it look like level flight? Here's level flight for somebody that asked. That's what it looks like in level flight. Somebody asked that question. There's a level flight. This bar is a little above the horizon, which is what it should be. All right.
I have a quick question. So he's hand flying it, but then the altitude says it's engaged and holding 3,500.
This one?
The previous one with the bank.
Okay, hold on.
Yeah, that one. See the altitude?
That one?
The
Yeah.
altitude indicator indicates it's holding. The autopilot is holding. Oh no, autopilot's disengaged at that point, but it still shows.
The autopilot is not engaged.
Okay, so how come it shows alt and then an altitude since it's not even engaged?
Yeah, that's the flight director.
Cheating.
Yeah, the flight director is telling you what you needed to hold that altitude.
Got it. Okay.
Yeah. So if you're in flight director mode, you can put it in heading mode, you can put it in indicated airspeed mode, vertical speed, and the flight director is just going to tell you what it would recommend you do to do that. But the autopilot is not doing it. The flight director is saying, this is what I do if that's really what you want to accomplish.
Okay.
Again,
Thanks.
you see the standard rate turn indicator down, or the turn indicator down here with the arrow off to the side, because obviously at a steep turn, you're going to be more in a standard rate. Those of you that fly the Warrior, you're used to the bank being very, very aggressive. It is not very, very aggressive on the Mooney. It's actually pretty nice bank angle. It rolls right over to a standard rate pretty readily. We've not experienced it being aggressive like the Warriors are. It does hunt a little bit when you're doing an indicated airspeed climb. It does hunt a little bit for that indicated airspeed.
So I want
right,
to make sure, so going on the previous question, so the autopilot's not engaged because there's not an AP annunciator.
Right.
But the fact that you've got a heading in green and an altitude in green just tells you that the flight director is working.
Correct. If you turn off the flight director where these magenta bars would go away, this would be blank up here.
Yeah. Okay.
In fact, when I do this maneuver, I turn them off. I don't like flight director pointing one way and the plane painting another. It just confuses me. So board can multitask better than I can. All right, so we're getting out of this maneuver. He actually went into an even steeper turn, I think, or we did an unusual attitude. Then he pressed a level button. So when he pressed a level button, autopilot became active. So now the autopilot's engaged and it says level, level. So it goes wing level, level flight. That's what it'll do for you. There are limitations on hitting the level button. It will not always engage. If you're really banked over, if you're past 70 degrees on a bank, it's not going to engage. That's past its limit. Or if you're pitched down, I think more than 30 degrees, there's some limits on it. We'll talk about it later. If you want to go to the GFC 500 part, there are limitations on it. All right, so now we're setting up to do the approach into ICTAL. So we've loaded the approach. You can see it showing up in the flight plan. We're direct to ICTAL now. It's going to do the whole new procedure turn, then fly inbound. So we're flying to ICTAL. We've actually now engaged what's called VNAV mode. VNAV mode, you have to load altitudes on the GTN 750. Then you can engage VNAV on the GFC 500. After you've dialed down the altitude select down below your current altitude. So we were at 3,500 feet. We've dialed the altitude down to 21. We've set the vertical nav to go down to 21. So he's engaged VNAV mode. What VNAV will do, this is actually, we captured 3,590. I think we just hit altitude hold. It's going to stay at 3,590 feet until it gets to top of descent. Which means it's going to descend at the descent rate we dialed in. I think it was a 3% glide slope. I don't remember what we dialed in. and then it will start the descent. So it will hold that altitude until it will descend at the rate or angle that you tell it, and you tell it on the 750, not on the G3X Touch. But this is telling you what it's going to VNAV down to, and this is telling you the altitude, the minimum altitude you've dialed it down to. And now you see these little, you see a V here. That means the VNAV is armed. It's armed here. There's your VNAV for your VNAV glide slope, if you will. The little magenta chevron is essentially your glide path indicator for the VNAV part. And this is the rate of descent we dialed in. So we did dial in a 500 foot a minute descent for the VNAV. This is telling you what it's going to go to. Once this comes in, it should start the VNAV down. Yes.
After those, we just obvious is that when you're either descending or climbing, you will set your power setting to apply in the descent so that you're not either gaining descent the speed of the descent.
That's correct.
It will just adjust that descent rate
That's correct.
based on your power setting.
Yes.
Money didn't get older from
Yeah. As Courtney's asking, it does not control your power. So you do have to do two things when you fly this plane, other than punching buttons. You do have to control the throttle and you have to control the rudders. You got to at least do that.
With the gear now.
You have to put the gear, well, only when you're landing. We're not landing yet. So, so there are a few things you still are responsible as the pilot. So yeah. So when it starts to descend, it's going to do like it would normally if you push the nose down. It's going to start to speed up. If you don't want to speed up, you got to reduce the power. If you tell it to climb, and you can do a VS climb, you can do an indicated airspeed climb, you can decide. We recommend doing an indicated airspeed climb, a vertical speed descent. And the reason I say that, if you do a vertical speed climb, you might get slow and you'll start to heat the engine up. It will not take you to a stall. If it gets too slow, it will give you an audible alert and will start to put the nose down. We recommend doing an indicated airspeed climb so that you keep the engine cool. We recommend a vertical speed descent. At least that's what I recommend. George may recommend something else. That's my recommendation. Since I'm talking, I'll make my recommendation.
No. 85 for VOI, 105 for cruise.
Yep. All right, so now you see it's captured. The VNAV is now the active mode. We do have an altitude select. So we've selected 21 VNAV. Turns out those are the same. So it's going to, and now it's following the VNAV glide path, if you will. And it's doing it roughly 500 feet a minute. It was a little bumpy that day, so we didn't stay exactly at 500. Okay, so now we're starting to fly in the approach. We're actually inbound back to ICTAL, and we brought up the approach plate. One of the fancy features of this that you don't have to use. If you've got other approach plates, you do not have to worry about this. If you want to do it and you want to learn it, great, have at it. Where you find it is on the waypoint page. That's where you can load, and there's a whole host of things you can pop up for the waypoint. One of them is the chart. If we have time, I can bring up one. I'll show you what your options are for that. And you select the approach plate you want. You can click on this. We did click on this and this is actually, we've already gone the full screen on the approach plate. This will take it back to a smaller inset. Then you can see the other options you have to the side for other things for the waypoint. And you can scroll around. You can take this and drag your finger around on it. You can zoom in and out. As you can see, this says zoom down here. So the inner knob will zoom in and out. You can pinch and zoom. You can still use the plus minus. As you're flying this, if you get close enough in Ward's position, I think I like it. Once you get past ICTAL and you're getting close ahead and you're going to start to fly the glide path, you don't really need to see all this. You should already know all this. Go back to full screen. So that's what you're going to see in a minute. We're currently now, we've captured 2,100 feet. So we're inbound to ICTAL. Then we're going to go to heading and maintain all that at 2,100. Now you see we're still on GPS for the lateral guidance. It's going to auto slew to the localizer past heading. All right, so it's now auto slewed to the localizer. Did that automatically. That's a GTN function. It did go to roll mode. This said roll. We had to re-engage the approach mode so that this went to localizer. I don't think it was supposed to do that. And you see it says glide slope. Before, remember I showed you one said GP for glide path. This is glide slope. This is localizer. This is glide slope. And your glide slope indicator now is green rather than magenta. You see our glide slopes coming in. We're getting close to Hetty. We're only half a mile from Hetty. We've slowed down to a more rational approach speed. and our distance to the airport. This is where the distance is nice. When you're coming in, you can announce how far you are out if you don't know. Hopefully you know. Okay, so we've got our green needles are centered up. We've now also programmed in our baro minimums. You'll see where that shows up in a minute. So we've punched in the baro minimums. Remember, I showed you where you select that from. You can dial in whatever you like. Seems like there's something else on this page. Okay. So we're getting down closer. We're now going down the glide path. You can see glide slope is now the active mode. Glide slope is in. We're going down to roughly 550 feet a minute. You can see our target, our flight path target is showing that we're pointed, and you can't quite tell. There's KTTA out in the distance, and you can actually see the runway. So we put the target right on the end of the runway. That's where we're headed, right to the end of the runway. We're down to 1920. We can go down to 247. So we flew that down to minimums. We hadn't quite gotten down yet. So here's some traffic. Somebody was taking off on runway. We're actually going into runway 3. Somebody was taking off on 21. There's a traffic call out. We get a show up. It's shown up here. This is actually the traffic there, and it's got a different shape and a sign to it because it's our color because it's close to us. All right, so we hit the go around button. So we're still pretty close to the traffic. We don't see them because it's not in our view out front of the aircraft anymore. So we only got a certain view angle out front. So the view is out like this. It's still showing us the traffic here, and it's saying there's traffic, and it's pointing. It says it's off to your right, dummy. Don't hit it. All right. So we've actually done the takeoff, the go around. He's already engaged the heading mode, but on the vertical part, we're still in the go around. So it says GA. This would, when you first engage that, the heading actually goes to GA. This goes to GA. Essentially, that's wings level, 7-degree pitch up. The autopilot does not disengage. So you get down to DA, you hit go around, it's going to start to pitch up. It's going to keep the wings level and pitch up to 7 degrees. You still have to apply the power. If you don't apply the power, it's going to pitch up and slow you down. It does not disengage. Okay. So once you establish that climb, you can re-engage your lateral mode. He's re-engaged heading. We do have an altitude selected at 2100. We have not engaged our vertical mode yet.
This
Yep.
may be a good time to remind everybody, you can always press the autopilot.
Yes. Yes.
This whole thing is just getting too much.
Yeah,
Get the hell out.
absolutely. That's what that's what that red button's for. Don't be reaching over here trying to find the autopilot. You can't see me on the screen, I guess. Don't reach over and try to find it on the GFC 500 head or the GMC 507. Use the one on the yoke. That's why there's a red button on the yoke. Disconnect it. This is one of the few autopilots that will not automatic or does not tell you have to disconnect. You can fly it down to 200 feet. You're supposed to disconnect below 200 AGL, but on the miss here, it will not disconnect. You hit the go around, throttle up. Garmin, in some of their videos, they actually tell you to throttle up, hit the go around. I highly recommend you not do that. Don't make that a habit. Hit the go around, then throttle up. You know where the throttle is. You use it all the time. You might not know where the go around button is. Fly Warrior, find the go around button. They were in different places when we first installed them. And I had 2 people throttle up, full throttle at DA, and then couldn't find the go around button. And we're screaming at the runway. You know where the throttle is, find the go around button. That's why part of the pre-flight is know where the go around button is. Okay. All right. So we've re-engaged. We actually went around and did partial panel, but I can't show you screenshots because the G3X touch was dead because we pulled the breaker. So now we're going out, we're going to do the RNAV, the 2-1. So we're going direct to Gus's. We're going to fly that back in. See the autopilot's engaged. We're in GPS. We're holding altitude at 3,100 feet. We're going to VNAV this one again. So you see we've engaged VNAV. We've scrolled it down to 2,000 feet. So it's going to, and we're still in altitude hold because we haven't got to a segment where we can ascend. So we've dialed our altitude select down to 2,000 below our current altitude of 3,100 feet. We've engaged VNAV. That's a requirement. You have to dial your altitude select below your current altitude for that to work. We've actually already armed the approach because we see our glide path indicator. The approach is armed. Our glide path is armed. We've punched in our bare minimum of 530. And that's where we are on the approach plate. You see Ward's brought up the approach plate again, zoomed in to see where we are. All right, now the VNAV is engaged. So VNAV is active. And you can see it, the VNAV is set for 2200 because that's what it is on this leg. So we've got our VNAV indications, our VNAV glide path here. Our descent rate, the VNAV intended descent rate. So VNAV is active, glide path is still armed. And we also have an altitude select for the VNAV. This is ALTV. That's the 2200 feet showing over here. Okay. All right, so he's made the turn from Yuxie inbound. Altitude's holding at 2200. If you were paying attention a lot, you'd say, well, why didn't it go down to 2000? We had altitude, we had it in VNAV mode. That segment was 22, this segment's 2000. Why is it not going down to 2000? Because our altitude select was all the way down to 2000. VNAV does not work as soon as LPV becomes active. That now takes priority. So if you want to do this last step down to 2000, you've got to do it the good old fashioned way. Well, kind of the old fashioned way, the older fashioned way. Dial down the altitude on your select, hit vertical speed. You've already got to 2000. All you need to do is hit a VS vertical speed, tell it how fast you want to get down to that 2000. Or you can set 2200, capture the glide path. Don't tell a DPE I said that. All right, so we're at Yuxie into Whizney, so our 4.5 miles to Whizney.
Question, previous
yeah.
slide. Previous slide where it showed the annunciator showing the VNAV target of 2200 feet.
Yep.
Who set that? The machine?
Yes.
Okay.
Yep. That's coming directly from the flight plan on the GTN 750. That's where you set all these altitude constraints on the 750. That's why I say to be good at this, you got to use the 750.
Okay.
You. I'm resisting the urge to talk about the internal flight plan. Okay, so we're at 2200 feet. Glide path is still armed. We're flying along and we intercept that. We're flying down. We had set the barrier minimums for 530. You can see again, our flight path indicator is showing us we're pointing right at the runway, which is what we want. We're down at 580 feet. There's our barrier minimum indicator or bug, if you will, for 530. And we landed out of that. Didn't crash the plane. Good for Ward. So that was what I had for this, for the flight stuff. The rest of this is real focused on the GFC 500. We've been at this for almost 2 hours. Don't know if you can absorb anymore. Don't know if I can talk that much more. Because the rest of it probably takes another hour. I'm happy to do it on another day if people want to see that. Figure a good part of this crowd, at least the flight instructors, probably have flown with the GFC 500s. But I'm happy to do maybe another session, another time to do that if Heinz is willing to help me with it.
I can watch you talk all day.